Hey friends, it's Cassie. Welcome back for another Simon Hurley Create video. Today we're going to be making a Christmas card. So let's talk about the products we're going to be using. We have the Jumbo Poinsettia Maker Stencil. This stencil is great because not only can you make a giant poinsettia, but it also has a holly berry and a branch and some berries as well. We're also going to be using the Swirly Ferns background stamp. And then we have a couple pieces of stark white cardstock, and then we're going to be using the Posh Poinsettas stamp set for the sentiments. And then we have an array of Simon Hurley ink colors. So let's get started with our stamping. I've got my Misty, and I've pulled the guts out of the Misty, and we're going to be pulling out this background stamp set. Once again, this is the Swirly Ferns. And if you've never used one of his pull-aparts, they're really awesome. It's almost like a puzzle once you've pulled them apart, but it's nice because you can take the pieces from the stamp set or from the stamp and you can create whole different cards because there's pieces that you can take out of it, which is just really genius in my opinion. I want to do some embossing on this, so I did use a magic powder bag and I'm sweeping away any of the excess powder. And then I'm going to ink up my stamp with some VersaMark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink. It's not going to look like I'm doing anything. And I'm living on the wild side by just stamping this down. I didn't have like a repositionable tape or anything like that on my paper, but it's okay because it's going to be the background, so I wasn't worried about it being perfect. And then I'm going to cover this with this embossing powder. I'll have it linked down below, but it is basically a clear embossing powder that happens to have glitter in it. So it's going to leave this sparkly background that's clear and subtle, and it's beautiful. So we're going to heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And so it'll go from a matte finish to a little bit of a shiny finish, and then those little glittery bits in the background will just be so gorgeous. And then we'll set that off to the side, and then we're going to start doing our stenciling. Now, the easiest way I have found to do this is actually to work with your greenery first. So I have another piece of stark white cardstock that I've stuck down. And if you weren't going to fussy cut this out, yes, I am going to fussy cut it out, you would want to make sure that your edges are covered with some purple tape or washi tape or something to mask that off. But because I'm not concerned about the edges, I'm just sticking it down onto my Wendy Vecchi station and using the colors that I've got there, which the first color was later Gator, and then I'm coming in with a little bit darker shade of green, which is that fake plant. And then I'll pull this off and clean off my stencil, but it really is easiest to start with the greenery, at least for me, that's what I found. And then to now take the poinsettia part and just move that around until it fits just perfectly inside those leaves. And there I found it. I just kept turning it until I found what worked well. And then I'll stick that down with those magnets once again. And then I'm going to start with some bee sting. So that's that lighter true red. And it's beautiful. We're just going to sponge that right on there. Blend it in good. And then we're going to come in with the Game Over color, which is more of a darker red, a little bit more burgundy. And again, you would want to mask off your edges if you didn't plan to fussy cut this out, which I didn't do. And I end up getting ink on the side, which again, I don't care. All right, so then I'll clean that stencil off one more time because I want to do the inside of my poinsettia. So I'm just making sure that that is good and clean. And then once again, you're going to take that piece and you're just going to move it around, kind of manipulate it until it fits in there nicely. And it took me a second to get it figured out. So I just kept turning it. And then when I found the one that fit better or best, I just stuck it down and I'm pulling in some slippery when wet. And then once again, we'll clean off our stencil and we're going to start fussy cutting. So this is a bigger image, which I think makes it even easier to cut out. All you're going to want to do, my tip for you would be to, whatever hand you're cutting with, you want to keep that arm fairly straight, fairly, you don't want to move it a whole lot. You're just going to move the paper mostly. So you're cutting with whatever hand you cut with, and you're moving with your opposite hand. And then that just makes it that much easier to cut just by manipulating with your other hand. And I'm leaving a nice little white border around it so that everything is cohesive. And look at that. That poinsettia stands out, but that background is very pretty. For our card base, I have some more stark white cardstock that I cut down to 8.5 inches by 5.5 inches, and I'm scoring it at 4.25 inches. This will be a top folding A2 size card. I decide I want to have some of that popping out, so I'm going to trim down my panel, just trimming off about 1/4 inch off the two sides. So now it will have a nice little white border all the way around the edge of that. I do want to bring in the stencil element to the inside of the card, so I'm living dangerously and I didn't mask this off, but I positioned the magnets in a spot that would keep me from going any further. So I'm just taking the holly leaves and we're going to stick that down and just, you know, stencil a little bit of that in there. And surprise, surprise, I didn't get ink outside of the stencil. You know, if you're concerned about that, definitely mask it off better than I did. And then we'll take the holly berry and move that around until I'm happy with how that's going to be in there. And then we'll bring in our bee sting. I didn't go crazy with colors by, you know, changing it up or adding any highlights or lowlights or whatnot. I just stenciled it right in there. And I think it looks so cool. It's just a nice little added touch. I love that these elements on this stencil are nice and big, so you can really make a statement with those. Now we've got to stamp out our sentiments, and once again those are from the Posh Poinsettia stamp set. That's a two-step stamp, and I have used that in the past, and that's a great stamp set. So I used my magic powder bag on some black cardstock and then inked up the sentiments with that VersaMark ink. And then I'm going to cover this with an ultrafine white embossing powder. This is Alabaster. I will have that linked down below. And then I'm going to heat set those until those are smooth and melted, and you'll know because it goes from a matte finish to a shiny finish. And now I'm going to take my guillotine trimmer and trim down my sentiments. I pretty much do this. This has been my go-to lately. I line up my sentiment, the very edge of it, right along that clear plastic piece in there, and then that's where I trim. And then I also try to line it up straight using the little grid that's inside the stencil or the guillotine trimmer. And then I'll have my sentiments all ready to go. I haven't trimmed down the edges yet. This one I'm going to trim at an angle. And I haven't trimmed off the other end of it because I'm going to wait until I add that to my card front. As you can tell, I did have some poinsettia on the back. This is how I discovered, for me anyway, that the best way for me to use that stencil was to stencil out the greenery first. I tried with the poinsettia, and for me it just did not work as well. So I used foam tape on the back of my poinsettia. I'm going to stick that down. You'll notice I do have a little bit of a red spot on one of the leaves, and that's okay. I'm going to actually cover it with the sentiment. So once again, I'm going to use some foam tape, and when I'm putting down a sentiment that has to go over the top of something that's already popped up, I found it's often easiest for me to put my foam tape right onto my panel. That way I'm not overlapping and having to try and, you know, cut it and manipulate it back and forth. So then we're just going to line that up on our glass mat and stick down our sentiment. And then flip that over and trim off the excess. And then we're going to need to attach that to our card base here in a second, but I'm going to put the other sentiment on the inside of the card. And I did cut those at an angle, and we'll just adhere this down with some liquid glue. You could add some, you know, Nuvo drops or embellishments on the outside of this card, but I really wanted that background and the poinsettia to just really pop, so I left it as is. So that's going to finish off our Christmas card for today. I figure I could probably crank out a bunch of these if I needed. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And thank you so much for everything you guys do. You guys are awesome, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye everybody.